I turned off the highway onto the narrow coastal road, checking the directions on my phone one more time. The GPS kept cutting out, but I'd memorized the last few turns. The road curved along the cliffs, and then I saw it. Beacon Point Lighthouse standing tall against the gray sky, exactly like in the pictures. I pulled into the gravel parking area and killed the engine. My car was the only one there except for an old blue pickup truck that had seen better days. I grabbed my duffel bag from the back seat and took a minute to stretch. The 6-hour drive from Burlington had done a number on my back. The wind hit me as soon as I got out, carrying the smell of salt and seaweed. It was colder here than inland, and I zipped my jacket up to my chin. The lighthouse stood about 100 yards away, connected to a small house at its base. Both were painted white with red trim, though the paint was peeling in places. I shouldered my bag and headed up the path. This was going to be my home for the next 3 months, my summer job between sophomore and junior year at UVM. The engineering program was kicking my ass, and I needed the break. Plus, the pay was decent, and I'd have plenty of time to study for next semester. A man stepped out of the house as I approached. He was shorter than me, maybe in his 60s, with thinning gray hair that blew wildly in the wind. He wore a heavy wool coat despite it being May, and his face was tanned and lined like old leather. "You must be Justin," he called out, his voice carrying easily over the wind. "That's me," I said, quickening my pace. He met me halfway down the path and stuck out his hand. "Grant Carlson, good to meet you in person." His handshake was firm, his hand rough with calluses. Up close, I could see his eyes were a sharp blue under bushy eyebrows. "Thanks for the opportunity, Mr. Carlson," I said. "Just, Grant is fine," he said, already turning back toward the house. "Come on in. Ferry leaves in 2 hours, and I've got plenty to show you before then." I followed him into the keeper's quarters. The front door opened directly into a small living room with worn but clean furniture. A wood stove sat in one corner, and the walls were lined with bookshelves. It felt lived in and cozy, if a bit cramped. The windows were small but looked out over the water, and I could see why someone would want to live here, especially during the summer months. "Kitchen's through there," Grant said, pointing to a doorway. "Bathroom's down the hall. Your bedroom's upstairs, first door on the right, mine's at the end. You can use it while I'm gone if you want more space." I set my bag down by the stairs. "How long have you been the keeper here?" "Going on 15 years, he said, moving toward the kitchen. "Coffee?" "Sure, thanks." The kitchen was small but functional, with old appliances and yellow countertops that probably hadn't been updated since the 80s. Grant filled a kettle and set it on the stove. "Food delivery comes once a week on Thursdays. You can add whatever you want to the order form, within reason. Internet satellite, works most of the time unless the weather's bad. Cell service is spotty. Landline's your best bet for emergencies." He gestured to an old corded phone on the wall. "Got it," I said, taking it all in. "And what exactly will I be doing here?" The job listing was a bit vague. Grant measured coffee grounds into a French press. "Lighthouse keeping isn't complicated, but it requires attention to detail and consistency. I'll show you the light mechanism after coffee. You'll need to maintain it, keep it clean, make sure it's working properly every night." "Is it automated?" "Mostly, but systems fail. That's why we still need a keeper." The kettle whistled, and he poured the water over the grounds. "You'll also log any ships that pass by, handle general upkeep of the property, and report any issues to the Coast Guard." "Sounds straightforward enough," I said. We took our coffee into the living room. Grant sat in what was clearly his usual chair, so I took the couch. "The previous assistant quit suddenly," Grant said after a few sips. 3 weeks ago. No warning." "Oh?" I tried to sound casual, but that was a bit concerning. "Any particular reason?" Grant shrugged. "Some people aren't cut out for the isolation, or the responsibility." He set his mug down. "Finish your coffee and I'll show you the lighthouse." The lighthouse was connected to the house by a short, enclosed walkway. Inside, a spiral staircase wound upward. Grant moved with surprising agility for his age, taking the steps 2 at a time. I followed him up, counting 97 steps before we reached the top. The lantern room was smaller than I expected, maybe 12 feet in diameter, with glass windows all around, offering a panoramic view of the ocean and coastline. The light mechanism itself sat in the center, a massive lens assembly surrounding a powerful lamp. "Fresnel lens," Grant said, patting the glass structure. "Original to the lighthouse, though the lamp's been upgraded over the years. Your main responsibility is making sure this stays lit from sunset to sunrise. He walked me through the startup procedure, the maintenance schedule, and what to do if anything malfunctioned. It was all fairly simple, though I took notes on my phone just to be sure. Any questions so far? Grant asked after the tutorial. Not about the light, I said, but I'm curious why the last assistant left so suddenly. Grant's expression didn't change. Like I said, isolation gets to some people. We headed back down, and Grant showed me the rest of the facility, the storage rooms, the generator shed, the small workshop where tools were kept. Everything was organized and labeled, which I appreciated. Finally, we ended up back in the living room. My ferry leaves at 4, Grant said, checking his watch. I'll be gone for a month, back on June 15th. The Coast Guard will check in by radio every Monday morning. If you need anything urgent, use the emergency channel. A month is a long vacation, I said. First one I've taken in 3 years, visiting my sister in Florida. He didn't elaborate further. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Before I forget, there are some rules you need to follow while you're here. I took the paper, expecting standard operating procedures. Instead, I found a handwritten list of 5 items. 1. Never respond to voices at night. 2. Keep the light on at all times between sunset and sunrise. 3. Do not allow entry to anyone, regardless of who they claim to be. 4. Avoid looking out the sea-facing windows between midnight and 3 a.m. 5. Record red ships in the logbook but do not speak their names aloud. I looked up at Grant, waiting for him to crack a smile. When he didn't, I laughed nervously. Is this some kind of initiation joke? Hayes the new guy? Grant's face remained serious. Just follow the rules, Justin. They're important. I folded the paper and put it in my pocket. Sure, whatever you say. He seemed to accept that and moved on. I've stocked the pantry and fridge, left emergency contacts on the bulletin board in the kitchen. Maintenance schedule is in the logbook. He paused. You'll be fine as long as you follow the rules and keep the light on. I nodded, not sure what else to say. This was getting weird, but the job paid well, and it would look good on my resume. If the old man wanted to play ghost stories, I could humor him. The rest of the afternoon passed quickly. Grant gathered his luggage, just one small suitcase, and we walked down to the dock together. The ferry was already approaching, a small passenger boat that serviced the coastal islands. Remember, Grant said as the boat docked, keep the light on and follow the rules. Will do, I said, shaking his hand again. Enjoy Florida. He boarded the ferry without looking back. I stood on the dock until the boat disappeared around the headland, then headed back up to the lighthouse. My lighthouse, at least for the next month. I spent the rest of the afternoon exploring more thoroughly on my own. The place was bigger than it looked, with storage rooms I hadn't noticed during Grant's tour, and a small cellar accessed through a trap door in the kitchen floor. Everything was clean and well-maintained, if a bit outdated. Around sunset, I climbed the lighthouse stairs again and started up the light mechanism just as Grant had shown me. The huge lens began to rotate, sending a powerful beam sweeping out over the water. I stood watching it for a while, feeling a strange sense of responsibility. Ships out there would be counting on this light to guide them safely past the rocky coastline. Back in the keeper's quarters, I made myself dinner, pasta with jarred sauce, nothing fancy, and settled in with one of the books from the shelves. It was an old maritime history of the New England coast, and despite myself, I found it interesting. The evening was quiet except for the wind and the distant sound of waves. Around 10:30, I was deep into my book when I heard something that made me look up. Justin, my name, clear as day, spoken in Grant's voice. I set the book down and listened. The voice came again from outside. Justin, can you hear me? I forgot something important. Let me in. It sounded exactly like Grant. Same gravelly tone, same accent. For a second, I almost got up to answer the door. Then I remembered the first rule on that strange list. Never respond to voices at night. I stayed silent, listening as the voice called my name a few more times, then went quiet. Probably just the wind playing tricks on me, I thought. Or maybe this was part of some elaborate joke the locals played on newcomers. Either way, I wasn't going to give Grant the satisfaction of falling for it if he was testing me. I went back to my book, though I found it harder to concentrate now. Around midnight, I decided to check the light before heading to bed. The climb up the spiral staircase was tiring, but the view from the top was worth it. The moon was nearly full, casting a silver path across the black water. The light rotated steadily, its beam cutting through the darkness. As I was about to head back down, something caught my eye. A ship, far out on the horizon, with dim red lights along its hull. I squinted, trying to make out more details, but it was too distant. Red lights weren't unusual for ships at night, but something about this one made me uneasy. I remembered Rule 5 from Grant's list. Record red ships in the logbook, but do not speak their names aloud. The logbook sat on a small desk in the corner of the lantern room. I opened it to today's date and wrote, 12:14 a.m., red ship sighted on eastern horizon. I didn't know its name, so that part of the rule was easy to follow. I watched the ship for a few more minutes, but it didn't seem to be getting any closer. Eventually, I headed back down to my bedroom, more tired than I'd realized. As I drifted off to sleep, I told myself that tomorrow I'd forget about Grant's weird rules and just focus on doing the job I was hired for. I tried not to look at the sea-facing windows as midnight got closer. I'd been sitting in the living room reading more of the maritime history book, but when my phone showed 11:45, I moved to the kitchen table instead. The chair faced the wall, not the windows, which felt safer. Grant's fourth rule kept running through my head. Avoid looking out sea-facing windows between midnight and 3 a.m. I wasn't sure if I actually believed any of this stuff. The voice last night could have been the wind, or maybe some local who thought it'd be funny to mess with the new lighthouse keeper. But after what happened with the red ship, I figured it couldn't hurt to follow the rules, just to be safe. I made some tea and pulled out my laptop to check my email. The satellite internet was surprisingly decent. I had a message from my engineering professor about a summer project I'd signed up for before taking this job. I'd need to let him know I wouldn't be available after all. The clock on my laptop hit midnight, and I felt a weird urge to look out the window. I fought it off and focused harder on my screen, typing out a response to my professor. The wind picked up outside, whistling around the corners of the house. Normal lighthouse sounds, I told myself. At 12:15, I heard it. A light tapping on the kitchen window, the one facing the ocean. I froze with my fingers over the keyboard. The sound came again, just a gentle tap-tap, like someone trying to politely get my attention. It's just a branch, I thought. Except there weren't any trees close enough to the house to reach the windows. The tapping came again, a little louder this time. 3 distinct taps, then a pause, then 3 more. I kept my eyes fixed on my laptop screen, not turning around. The tapping stopped for maybe 30 seconds, and I started to relax. Then it came back, harder and more insistent. It had a pattern now. 3 quick taps, pause, 2 slow taps, pause, 3 quick taps again. Over and over, the same rhythm. Tap, 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 tap. I closed my laptop and sat completely still, listening. The tapping continued, perfectly rhythmic, never varying from the pattern. No branch or piece of debris blown by the wind would tap that consistently. "It's nothing," I said out loud, my voice sounding weird in the quiet kitchen. "Just the wind." The tapping immediately stopped. I held my breath, waiting. 10 seconds passed in complete silence. Then the tapping came back, twice as loud as before. The same pattern but faster, more urgent. I grabbed my phone and laptop and backed away from the kitchen. Where should I go? My bedroom was upstairs, but that felt too exposed with all its windows. The lighthouse itself had too many windows in the lantern room. The supply closet. It was in the hallway between the kitchen and the living room. No windows, just a solid door. I opened it, squeezed past the mops and brooms, and sat on an overturned bucket in the back corner. I pulled the door closed and turned on my phone's flashlight. The tapping continued, growing louder. It sounded like it was moving from window to window around the house. First the kitchen, then the living room, then around to what must have been Grant's bedroom. I checked the time. 12:43 a.m. Over 2 hours to go before 3 a.m. I tried distracting myself with my phone, but the battery was already down to 20%. I turned off the flashlight and sat in the dark, just listening. The tapping continued for what felt like hours, sometimes fading almost to nothing, then returning with renewed intensity. At one point, I heard what sounded like scratching, like fingernails dragging slowly down a window pane. My skin crawled. I hugged my knees to my chest and focused on my breathing. I must have dozed off because I jerked awake when my phone vibrated with a low battery warning. It was 2:49 a.m. The tapping had stopped. I waited, straining to hear any sound, but the house was completely silent. I stayed in the closet until my phone showed 3:05 a.m. Then I cautiously opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. The house felt normal again. I checked all the doors, still locked. I didn't look out any windows just to be safe. I went upstairs to my bedroom, exhausted. Whatever had happened, it was over now. I fell asleep almost immediately. The next morning, I woke up late, around 9:30. The events of the night before felt dreamlike in the bright sunshine. I made coffee and forced myself to look out the kitchen window. The ocean was calm, blue-gray under a partly cloudy sky. After breakfast, I went outside to check the windows. I examined each one, looking for marks, scratches, anything unusual. There was nothing. No damage to the glass, no footprints in the soil beneath the windows, nothing out of place at all. I walked the perimeter of the house and the lighthouse looking for any sign of what might have caused the tapping. Nothing. Just the normal sounds of seabirds and waves hitting the rocks. I spent the day doing maintenance tasks from Grant's checklist, checking the generator, cleaning the lens in the lantern room, taking inventory of supplies. Normal routine work that helped me feel like everything was under control. As evening approached, I made sure all the doors and windows were locked. I started the lighthouse beam at sunset, just like I was supposed to. Then I heated up some canned soup for dinner and tried to act like this was just another normal night. But as midnight got closer, I felt the same uneasiness from the night before. I sat up in the living room with my laptop, a book, and a thermos of coffee. No way was I going to fall asleep before 3 a.m. tonight. Just after midnight, I heard it again. Not tapping this time, but a voice, coming from outside, near the front door. "Justin! Hey, Justin! Let me in, man!" I froze. It wasn't Grant's voice this time. It was Leonard's voice, Leonard Gray, my college roommate. I'd recognize his laugh anywhere. "Justin, seriously, open up. You're not going to believe how I found this place. Total coincidence, dude." I stood up, automatically moving toward the door before catching myself. Leonard was in California. He'd gotten an internship with some tech company in San Francisco. He'd texted me about it just last week. "Justin, come on. It's freezing out here. Just open the door." The voice was perfect. The same energetic tone, the slight laugh that always seemed to bubble under Leonard's words. But it couldn't be him. "I know you're in there. I can see the light from your laptop. Just let me in for a minute." I backed away from the door. Rule 3, do not allow entry to anyone regardless of claims. "Fine, be that way," Leonard's voice said, suddenly sounding annoyed. "I'll just wait out here all night. Hope you're comfortable in there." Then silence. I waited, hardly breathing. After a few minutes, I heard footsteps crunching on gravel, moving away from the door, circling around toward the ocean side of the house. I spent another night in the supply closet, listening to Leonard's voice call to me intermittently from different spots around the house, sometimes laughing, sometimes angry, sometimes concerned. All in Leonard's voice, all perfectly mimicking his speech patterns. Around 1 a.m. I remembered the red ship. I hadn't checked for it, but there was no way I was going up to the lantern room now, not with whatever was outside pretending to be my roommate. I didn't sleep at all that night. When 3 a.m. finally came, the voice stopped mid-sentence. One moment it was there, talking about some party we'd gone to sophomore year, and the next, nothing. Complete silence. I waited until sunrise before I went outside. Again, no footprints, no evidence anyone had been there. I checked the logbook in the lantern room and saw that I'd missed recording the red ship, if it had appeared at all. I felt guilty about breaking Rule 5, but I wasn't about to leave the safety of the house while that thing was outside. The third night, I was better prepared. I had the supply closet set up with a camping lantern, water, snacks, and a pillow. I started the lighthouse beam at sunset and did a complete check of all doors and locks. Everything was fine until 1:30 a.m. when I heard something different, a change in the sound of the lighthouse. The steady mechanical hum had stopped. The beam had gone out. I ran from the closet and looked up the spiral staircase. No light was rotating at the top. The lighthouse was dark. I grabbed a flashlight and raced up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. In the lantern room, I could see immediately what had happened. The bulb had burned out. The mechanism was still turning, but there was no light. Grant had shown me where the replacement bulbs were kept in a cabinet against the wall. I fumbled with the latch, finally getting it open, and pulled out one of the specialized bulbs. My hands were shaking as I carefully removed the hot dead bulb and installed the new one. The manual restart procedure took precious minutes, flipping breakers, resetting the timer, waiting for the bulb to warm up. I kept glancing out at the darkness, aware that the lighthouse had been dark for maybe 6 or 7 minutes now. Finally, the beam flickered on. I adjusted the focus as Grant had shown me, and the lighthouse was back to normal. 8 minutes total. Not bad for my first emergency repair. I was about to head back downstairs when the rotating beam swept across the rocks below the lighthouse, and I saw them. Figures. Dozens of them, standing on the jagged rocks at the base of the cliff, all perfectly still, all looking up at the lighthouse, at me. I couldn't make out their features clearly, just dark silhouettes against the slightly lighter darkness of the ocean. But they were human-shaped, and they were all completely motionless, faces tilted up toward the lantern room. I stumbled back from the glass, my heart pounding. When the beam came around again, I forced myself to look. They were gone. The rocks were empty. I spun around, following the beam as it rotated, trying to catch another glimpse of the figures. Nothing. Just empty rocks and churning waves. Had I imagined it? Some trick of the light and shadows? I stayed in the lantern room for another half hour, watching the beam sweep around and around. No figures reappeared. Eventually, I went back downstairs, double-checking every lock along the way. I spent the rest of the night in the supply closet again, listening for tapping or voices, but there was nothing. The lighthouse beam continued its steady rotation until dawn. By the 4th night, I'd stopped questioning Grant's rules. I followed them exactly. I stayed away from sea-facing windows between midnight and 3 a.m. I kept the lighthouse beam running perfectly. I didn't respond to the voices that called to me from outside, even when they sounded exactly like people I knew. I recorded the red ship in the logbook when it appeared on the eastern horizon at 12:17 a.m. I didn't know what was out there, but I wasn't taking any chances. Grant's rules were there for a reason, and I was going to follow every single one of them. I started keeping a tally of the red ship sightings in the back of the logbook. It showed up 3 times the first week I was here, then 5 times the second week. Now, it was coming almost every night, sometimes twice. I'd gotten into a routine with the recordings. I'd note the time, position on the horizon, how long it stayed visible. I kept it simple. 1:04 a.m., red ship, eastern horizon, visible for approximately 6 minutes. Never anything more detailed than that. The names, though, that was new. I first noticed them 4 nights ago. I was doing my usual check of the lantern room at midnight when I spotted the red ship right where it always appeared. But this time, as the beam swept across it, I could make out lettering on the hull. The name was Mariner's Folly, clear as day. The next night it was Queen of Tides, then Blackwater, then Tempest's Call. The names kept changing. At first I thought maybe there were different ships, but it was always the same vessel, same size, same red lights, same position on the horizon. Just the name kept shifting. I didn't write the names down. Something told me not to. I stuck with Grant's 5th rule. Record the sighting, but don't speak its name. I figured writing the names counted as speaking them, so I kept that part to myself. The night of the storm, I was sitting in the kitchen with my back to the windows. It was coming down hard. Rain hammering the roof, wind howling around the corners of the house. The weather report had mentioned a squall moving through, but this was more like a full-blown nor'easter. I'd gotten used to the voices by now. They still showed up most nights, calling my name, asking to be let in. I'd heard my mom, my dad, my high school girlfriend Ellie, and about half a dozen friends from college. Tonight, it was my engineering professor, Dr. Whitman. "Justin, are you in there? I need to talk to you about your summer project." His voice carried perfectly over the storm. "I drove all the way up here. At least open the door so we can talk." I didn't answer. I didn't even look up from my book. The tapping started around 12:30. It was different tonight, more like pounding, urgent. It moved from window to window faster than usual, like whatever was out there was getting frantic. Then, at 1:17 a.m., everything went quiet. The tapping stopped. The voice stopped. Even the storm seemed to pause for a moment. That's when the lighthouse beam went out. 1 second, the familiar mechanical hum and rhythmic sweep of light was there. The next, darkness. The emergency lights in the house flickered on, but they were dim and yellowish. "Shit," I muttered, grabbing my flashlight from the table. I ran to the spiral staircase and took the steps 2 at a time, my light bouncing wildly against the walls. The storm sounds got louder as I climbed. The enclosed walkway and lantern room weren't as insulated as the house. By the time I reached the top, I was breathing hard. Rain lashed against the glass panels surrounding the lantern room. The wind was so strong the whole structure seemed to sway slightly. The lamp was dead. The mechanism was still turning, making its slow rotation, but the bulb had blown. I'd done this once before, so I knew the drill. I opened the cabinet, pulled on the heat-resistant gloves, and carefully removed the dead bulb. Lightning flashed as I was fitting the replacement bulb, illuminating the lantern room in stark white light. In that instant, I saw it through the glass. The red ship. It wasn't on the horizon this time. It was maybe 200 yards offshore, sitting perfectly still despite the churning waves. The storm shouldn't have allowed that. A vessel that size should have been rocking, moving with the swells. But it just sat there, unnaturally steady, its red lights glowing through the rain. I froze. Another lightning flash came, brighter this time. I could see the name on the hull, Lighthouse Keeper. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the new bulb. I forced myself to focus, to finish the job. Bulb in place, close panel, reset breaker, initialize warm-up sequence. The seconds dragged by as I waited for the lamp to come back to life. I kept my eyes on the control panel, refusing to look out at the water again. When the beam finally flickered on, I adjusted the focus and watched as it swept across the water. The ship was gone, just angry waves crashing against the rocks. I stayed in the lantern room for another hour, watching the beam make its rotations, making sure it didn't fail again. The storm gradually moved offshore, the rain easing to a drizzle. I checked my watch. 2:45 a.m., almost through the danger hours. The next day, I started going through the logbook more carefully. I'd been using it to record the red ship sightings, but I hadn't really read the older entries. Now I flipped back, past my own neat handwriting, past Grant's blocky all caps, to entries from years ago. Red ship sighted 2:17 a.m. Eastern Horizon, read an entry from 2018, written in tight, cramped script. Red ship 12:04 a.m., second night in a row, voices growing louder, said another from 2015. I kept turning pages, going further back. Ship appeared again tonight. The name has changed. I won't write it here. Third night of tapping. It knows I'm alone. Some of the handwriting changed between entries. Different keepers over the years, I figured. But they all described the same things. The red ship, the voices, the tapping at windows. Then I found something that made my stomach drop. An entry from 2011, written in shaky handwriting. Red ship getting closer each night. I think it wants me to. That was it. The sentence just stopped. No period, no continuation on the next line. The next entry was in different handwriting, dated 2 weeks later. I found more of these abrupt endings scattered throughout the logbook. Entries that stopped mid-thought, followed by gaps of weeks or months before a new keeper's handwriting appeared. What happened to those people? Did they leave like Grant's last assistant? Or was it something worse? I didn't want to think about it. The voices were getting better at their game. Last night, it was my mom and dad together, having a conversation outside my bedroom window. "I'm really worried about him, John," my mom's voice had said. "He hasn't called in weeks." "We should just knock," my dad had replied. "He's probably inside." Their voices were perfect. The way my mom always sounded a little hesitant, the slight gruffness in my dad's tone, the way they talked over each other sometimes. It was them, exactly them. Except it couldn't be. My parents were in Vermont. They thought I was working at an engineering firm on the coast, not keeping a lighthouse. I hadn't told them about this job. There was no way they could know where I was. The tapping had gotten worse too. Last night it had gone on until 5 a.m., well past the danger hours. It wasn't just tapping anymore either. Sometimes it was scratching, sometimes pounding, sometimes a slow drag like something heavy being pulled across the glass. I'd taken to sleeping in the supply closet most nights. I'd made it comfortable with a sleeping bag and pillow. It was safer in there. No windows. But the hardest part was fighting the urge to look. Every night, as midnight approached, I felt it building inside me. This need to go to the windows. To look out at the ocean between 12 and 3 a.m. It was like an itch I couldn't scratch, getting worse each night. I'd catch myself walking toward the living room windows without even realizing I'd gotten up from my chair. Or I'd be in the middle of reading, and suddenly I'd be thinking about how easy it would be to just peek outside, just for a second. Last night I'd actually made it all the way to the window, my hand on the curtain, before I'd snapped out of it. I had no memory of crossing the room. 1 minute I was at the kitchen table. The next I was standing at the window, ready to look out. I'd backed away, heart pounding. What was happening to me? Tonight was the same. I sat in the kitchen, back to the windows, trying to focus on a book, but the urge was there, pulsing at the back of my mind. Just one look. What could it hurt? Just a quick glance to see what's out there. I gripped the edge of the table. No, I knew the rules. I'd seen what happened when I broke them. The ship coming closer. The voices getting more convincing. The tapping started right on schedule. 3 quick taps. Pause. 3 more. Justin. My name drifted through the walls, spoken in Leonard's voice. Come on, man. Just look outside. I need to show you something. I stared down at my white knuckles on the table edge. I wasn't going to look. I wasn't going to answer. I wasn't going to break the rules, but God, I wanted to. I'm down to 7 days left at the Lighthouse. 1 week until Grant comes back. I've been marking off the days on the kitchen calendar with thick red X's. Something about seeing those marks gives me a weird sense of accomplishment, like I'm surviving something, not just working a job. The weather's turned nasty again. Rain's been hammering the lighthouse for 2 days straight, and the wind makes this high-pitched whistle through the tower stairs. I've been keeping up with maintenance, but it's getting harder to focus on normal tasks when every night brings something new. I was in the living room checking the marine radio equipment when it happened. The radio's been broken since I got here. Grant mentioned it needed parts. Just a dusty box sitting on the shelf that I'd pretty much ignored. But this morning it crackled to life. At first I thought I'd bumped something or accidentally turned it on, but I hadn't touched it. The dial lit up and static poured out of the speaker. I stood there staring at it like an idiot. Through the static, voices started coming through. Not clear at first, just fragments breaking through the white noise. Then they got stronger. Different voices, some deep, some higher pitched, all formal sounding, like they were reading from something. Mariner's Folly, position 4312 north, 7038 west, lost January 1892. The static swallowed the voice, then another broke through. Queen of Tides, position 4315 north, 7041 west, lost March 1907. I grabbed my notebook and started writing down everything I could make out. The coordinates, the ship names, the dates. The voices kept coming, listing ship after ship. Some I recognized. They were the same names I'd seen on the red ship. Others were new to me. Blackwater, position 43.09 north, 7036 west, lost November 1923. Tempest Call, position 4317 north, 7039 west, lost April 1945. Lighthouse Keeper, position... The radio cut out, just died, mid-sentence. I tried turning the dial, hitting the side of it, checking if it was plugged in. Nothing. Dead as it had been before. I sat there looking at my notebook, at the list of ships and coordinates. Something about that last one, Lighthouse Keeper, sent a chill through me. That was the name I'd seen on the red ship during the storm. I went to Grant's bookshelf and found a maritime history of the region. Took me about an hour, but I found mentions of every ship on my list. All of them had sunk within 50 miles of Beacon Point. All of them were real shipwrecks with real dates that matched what the radio had said. That night, the red ship appeared again. It's been showing up every single night now, not just occasionally like before. And it's changed its pattern. Instead of sitting on the horizon, it circles the lighthouse, keeping the exact same distance, maybe half a mile out, just going around and around, always the same distance, like it's tied to an invisible tether with the lighthouse at the center. I watched it through the lantern room glass, keeping track of its movement. 4 hours it circled, from midnight until 4 a.m., when it vanished as suddenly as it always does. The name on its hull changed 3 times while I watched. Mariner's Folly, then Blackwater, then Lighthouse Keeper. The next night, the tapping started at 12:17, right on schedule. But this time, there was scratching too. Not just the usual 3-tap pattern, but long, slow scratches that sounded like fingernails on the glass. I stayed in the supply closet, hands over my ears, until it stopped at 3 a.m. In the morning, I forced myself to check the windows. There were marks on the kitchen window, thin, curved lines like someone had scratched it with the tip of a knife. I took pictures with my phone, then tried to clean them off. The glass was smooth to the touch, but the marks were definitely there, visible when the light hit them right. When I checked again after lunch, The marks were gone. Completely gone. I pulled up the pictures on my phone to make sure I hadn't imagined it. The scratches were clear in the photos, but now the actual window was perfectly clean. I took new pictures of the unmarked glass, comparing them side by side with the morning shots. Something's not right about this place. I mean, I knew that already, but it keeps getting worse. The rules Grant gave me don't seem like enough anymore. I decided to search the house more thoroughly. There had to be something. Records, notes, anything that might explain what was happening. I went through cabinets and drawers, checked behind furniture, tapped walls for hollow spots. I was examining the living room fireplace when I noticed one of the bricks near the floor seemed loose. I wiggled it, and it came out easily, revealing a small cavity behind it. Inside was a yellowed envelope. The envelope contained an old black and white photograph, maybe from the 1980s based on the clothes. 6 men standing in front of the lighthouse, arms around each other's shoulders, smiling at the camera. I recognized Grant on the far right. Younger, with darker hair, but definitely him. The back of the photo had neat handwriting. Beacon Point Keepers, 1983. Left to right, Thomas Weaver, Robert Mills, James Donovan, William Haynes, Samuel Cooper, Grant Carlson. 6 lighthouse keepers. Why would they need 6 for one lighthouse? I put the photo in my pocket and went to check the logbooks again. I'd already gone through the recent logs, but now I dug deeper, pulling out older volumes from the bottom shelf. The entries went back decades. I searched for the names from the photo and found all of them. Thomas Weaver's handwriting filled entries from 1979 to 1984. Robert Mills from 1981 to 1986. James Donovan's entries stopped abruptly in May 1988. William Haynes wrote until December 1992. Samuel Cooper's last entry was in February 1997, and then just Grant from 1983 until now. 3 of them, Donovan, Haynes, and Cooper, had final entries that ended mid-sentence or with strange notes. Red ship closer tonight. The voices sound like Sarah now. I think if I just... Donovan, May 12th, 1988. Cannot maintain the schedule anymore. 3 nights without sleep. The marks on the glass spell out my name now. I know what it wants me to. Haynes, December 3rd, 1992. Grant will understand. The ship is waiting for me. I have to. Cooper, February 27th, 1997. After each of these entries, there were gaps of several weeks before entries resumed in different handwriting. No explanations, no mentions of what happened to them. They just disappeared. I read through Grant's entries, looking for any mention of the other keepers. Nothing. It was like they'd never existed, but his entries were meticulous about the red ship sightings, the tapping, the voices, all the same things I'd been experiencing. Tomorrow's Grant's last night away. He's supposed to return the day after on the afternoon ferry. I don't know if I'm relieved or terrified at the thought of not being alone here anymore. Tonight was the worst night yet. I'd just finished my midnight check of the lighthouse beam when every window in the place started rattling at once. Not just the usual tapping, this was violent shaking, like something was trying to break through from every direction. I ran to the lantern room and found the beam flickering despite my careful maintenance earlier in the day. The mechanism was running, but the light kept dimming and brightening, dimming and brightening. I checked the connections, the bulb, everything. Technically, it was all working fine, but still, the light wouldn't stay steady. I spent the entire night in the lantern room, manually adjusting the focus and power, resetting the breaker whenever the light threatened to go out completely. I couldn't risk letting the beam die for more than a few minutes, not after what I'd seen happen when the light went dark. The windows kept rattling downstairs. I could hear it even over the hum of the lighthouse machinery. Around 2 a.m., the voices started, not just 1 or 2 like before, but dozens of them, all calling at once. Some called my name, others called for Grant, and others were calling names I didn't recognize. Probably Thomas, Robert, James, William, and Samuel. The red ship circled the lighthouse all night, never coming closer, never moving farther away. Just that same perfect circle, its name changing every hour or so. I kept the beam running through sheer stubbornness, fighting against whatever was making it flicker. Sometime around 4 a.m., I realized I was talking to the light itself. Come on, stay with me, just a few more hours. My hands were cramped from adjusting dials and my eyes burned from the strain, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't let the light go out for more than those 10-minute stretches when I had to reset everything. By sunrise, my whole body ached. The voices had gone quiet, and the ship had vanished with the first light. The beam finally stabilized on its own, shining steady and strong like nothing had ever been wrong with it. I shut down the light for the day and dragged myself down the spiral stairs. Every window was intact. No broken glass, no new scratches. Just the lighthouse, silent in the morning light, keeping its secrets for another day. Grant came back on the 4 o'clock ferry just like he'd said he would. I watched from the dock as the small passenger boat approached, my hands stuffed in my jacket pockets against the morning chill. There weren't many people on board, just Grant, a middle-aged couple with matching windbreakers, and an older man with a fishing pole. Grant spotted me as the ferry docked. He didn't wave or smile, just nodded once like he wasn't surprised to see me waiting. He looked exactly the same weathered face, same heavy wool coat despite the warmer June weather. He carried the same single suitcase he'd left with. "You're still here," he said as he stepped onto the dock. Not a question. "Barely," I said. We walked back to the lighthouse without saying much. The gravel crunched under our feet. The morning was clear and calm, with seagulls wheeling overhead and waves lapping gently against the rocks below. It looked so normal in the daylight. You'd never know what happened here after dark. Inside, I'd already made coffee. 2 mugs sat on the kitchen table next to Grant's handwritten list of rules. I'd placed it right in the center where he couldn't miss it. He glanced at it as he set his suitcase down by the door. "You want to unpack first?" I asked. He shook his head. "This can wait." He hung his coat on the hook by the door and sat down at the table. I poured coffee into both mugs and sat across from him. The rules paper sat between us like a third person. "I followed them," I said, tapping my finger on the paper. "Every single one, never answered the voices, kept the light on no matter what, didn't let anyone in, stayed away from the windows between midnight and 3, wrote down the red ship sightings." I took a breath. "But I need to know why." Grant wrapped his hands around his mug but didn't drink. His knuckles were sun-spotted and knotted with age. "You saw things." "Yeah, I saw things. Heard things too." The words came out sharper than I intended. "People I know, voices that shouldn't be here, tapping that moved around the house, a ship that changes its name, figures on the rocks when the light went out." Grant nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving my face. "And you followed the rules." I just said I did. "Good." He finally took a sip of his coffee. "That's why you're still here." I leaned forward. "What happened to the others? The keepers before me?" His eyebrows lifted slightly. "You've been looking through the old logbooks." "I found the photo too, the one behind the brick. 6 of you, but I only found records for 5 in the logs." Grant sighed and set down his mug. "Thomas Weaver was before my time. He trained me when I started in '83. What happened to Donovan and Haynes and Cooper? Their entries just stop, mid-sentence." Grant's eyes drifted toward the window, toward the lighthouse tower visible through the glass. "This place has been here a long time, Justin. Over a century. The first light was lit in 1887. You know how many ships have wrecked on these rocks? I read about some in your books. Hundreds, especially before modern navigation, and even with it, storms still push ships where they shouldn't go." He traced a finger along a groove in the wooden table. "That's a lot of death. A lot of people who didn't want to die." I waited for him to continue. The kitchen was quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock and the distant sound of waves. "The things you heard, the things you saw, they're what's left. Things that don't want to be forgotten." Grant's voice had dropped lower. "The voices, the tapping, the red ship, they're all connected to this place." "Connected how?" "The lighthouse keeps them at bay. That beam, it's more than just a warning for ships. Always has been." He looked back at me. "That's why the first rule is so important. Keep the light on between sunset and sunrise, no matter what." "But what are they?" I pressed. "Ghosts?" Grant shrugged. "Call them what you want. Memories, echoes, doesn't really matter what name we give them. And the rules? They keep them away?" "The rules keep keepers safe," Grant corrected. "The light keeps them at bay. The rules keep you from making mistakes that let them in." I thought about the voices that sounded exactly like people I knew, the way they called my name. The way the tapping moved around the house, testing each window. The compulsion I'd felt to look outside during those dangerous hours. "The assistant before me," I said. "What happened to him?" Grant's face hardened. "He didn't follow the rules." "What happened?" I repeated. "Coast Guard found him on the rocks 3 days after he disappeared. He couldn't remember his own name." Grant's voice was flat. "Couldn't remember anything. He's in a facility in Portland now. Doctors say he might never recover." A chill ran through me despite the warm kitchen. I thought about how close I'd come to looking out those windows, how many times I'd found myself standing in front of them with no memory of walking there. "And Cooper? Haynes? Donovan? The ones in the logbooks?" "Same story, different endings." Grant took another sip of coffee. "Cooper walked into the ocean one night, never found his body. Haynes disappeared during his watch. Blood on the lantern room floor was all that was left. Donovan?" He paused. "Well, let's just say what they found wasn't really Donovan anymore." My mouth went dry. Jesus. "That's why I need someone who follows the rules." Grant's eyes locked with mine. "Someone who can keep the light on." I pushed my chair back from the table. "I'm leaving today, on the afternoon ferry." Grant nodded slowly. "I figured. Most do after their first month." He studied me for a moment. "You could stay, you know. You've got what it takes. You followed the rules even when you didn't understand them. That's rare." I shook my head. "I can't do another night here. The pay's good. Benefits too, through the Coast Guard program. And you'd know what you're dealing with now." "No," I said firmly. "I need to go back to normal, engineering, things that make sense." Grant almost smiled. "Fair enough." I stood up and looked around the kitchen. It felt strange knowing I'd be gone in a few hours, back to a world where windows were just windows and voices belonged to real people. "I'll pack my things," I said. Grant nodded. "Ferry leaves at 4, same one that brought me in." I went upstairs to my room and started gathering my clothes, shoving them into my duffel bag without bothering to fold them. My hands were steady, but my mind kept replaying everything I'd seen and heard over the past month. The red ship circling the lighthouse, the dozens of figures on the rocks when the light went out, the voices that knew exactly how my friends and family sounded. When I came back downstairs with my bag, Grant was standing in the living room looking at the maritime history book I'd left open on the side table. "You're different than the others who've left," he said without looking up. "They ran. You're walking away." "Is there a difference?" "There is." Now he looked at me. "You're leaving because you know what's here and you're choosing not to stay. They left because they couldn't handle not knowing." I set my bag by the door. "I still don't really know what's here." "You know enough." Grant closed the book. "Some things don't need to be understood. They just need to be respected." We walked to the dock together around 3:30. The afternoon was clear, with sunlight glinting off the water and the lighthouse standing tall and white behind us. It looked so ordinary, so harmless. "What will you do now?" Grant asked as we waited for the ferry. "Go back to school, finish my engineering degree." I squinted at the horizon. Design bridges or buildings, things that follow the laws of physics. Grant chuckled. "Everything follows laws, just not always the ones they teach in school." The ferry appeared around the headland, a small white shape against the blue water. I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders at the sight of it. "One last thing," Grant said. "Whatever you saw here, whatever you heard, it stays here. People don't understand, and they don't want to. I won't tell anyone," I promised. Who would believe me anyway? The ferry docked, and the same captain who'd brought Grant earlier nodded to us. I picked up my duffel bag and stepped onto the boat. Grant didn't offer to shake hands, and I didn't either. Some experiences go beyond ordinary goodbyes. As the ferry pulled away, I stood at the rail watching the lighthouse grow smaller. Grant stood on the dock until we rounded the headland, a solitary figure with his hands in his pockets, guardian of a place that existed between worlds. The mainland appeared ahead, normal and solid and real. I thought about everything I'd experienced, the voices that weren't voices, the ship that changed names, the scratches that appeared and disappeared, the logbook entries that stopped mid-sentence. I'd come here as an engineering student who believed in concrete facts and measurable forces. I was leaving as something different. Some mysteries don't need solving. Some rules don't need reasons. Sometimes survival depends on simply following instructions without question. I made it back to campus in early July. The summer session was already 3 weeks in, and I found myself sitting in the back of structural analysis like I'd never left. My classmates asked where I'd been. I told everyone I was doing an engineering internship. That's what I stuck with. Close enough. Just design work, I'd say with a shrug. Nothing exciting. It took about a week to get back into the rhythm of classes, problem sets, and group projects. My roommate Leonard got back from his actual internship in San Francisco 2 weeks after I returned, full of stories about the tech company he'd worked for and the people he'd met. You should have seen this place, Justin. Free food everywhere, cold brew on tap. They had nap pods, actual pods where you could just go sleep in the middle of the day. I nodded along, half listening as I worked through differential equations at our shared desk. I hadn't told Leonard anything about the Lighthouse. How could I? Hey, remember when something perfectly mimicked your voice outside my window at midnight? You're quiet lately, he said one night as we were getting ready for bed. That Lighthouse job mess you up or something? Nah, just focused on catching up. Leonard seemed to accept this, and after a few weeks, he stopped noticing anything different about me. But I knew I wasn't the same. Some nights I'd wake up suddenly, convinced I'd heard 3 quick taps on our third-floor dormitory window. I'd lie perfectly still, listening, my heart hammering against my ribs. But there was never anything there, just the occasional branch scraping the building when the wind picked up or the normal settling sounds of an old dorm. I graduated the following May with my civil engineering degree. My parents drove up from southern Vermont for the ceremony, proud and relieved I'd finished on time despite my detour at the Lighthouse. I hadn't told them what really happened either. As far as they knew, I'd spent a month doing routine maintenance work for the Coast Guard. So what's next? My dad asked at the celebratory dinner after the ceremony. I've got a few interviews lined up, I said. One in Boston, couple in Portland. Portland's nice, my mom said. Not too far from home. I ended up taking a position with a civil engineering firm in Portland, Maine. The job involved designing improvements for aging infrastructure, bridges, tunnels, and public buildings. The work was steady, logical, and grounded in physics I understood. Concrete and steel behaved according to predictable rules. Forces acted in ways you could calculate. I found an apartment downtown, a small one-bedroom with big windows facing the street. I specifically chose it because none of the windows faced the ocean. Sometimes on weekends, I'd drive up the coast. Maine has hundreds of miles of shoreline, and I told myself I was just exploring my new home state. But I knew what I was doing. I was testing myself. About an hour north of Portland, there's a turnoff that leads to the coastal road to Beacon Point. The first time I drove past it, I felt my hands tighten on the steering wheel. My foot eased off the gas without me telling it to. I watched the road sign grow larger in my windshield, then disappear in my rearview mirror. I kept driving, but I came back the next weekend, and the weekend after that. I never took the turnoff, just drove past it, sometimes slowing down, sometimes not. Each time, Grant's rules would run through my head like a mantra. Never respond to voices at night. Keep the light on between sunset and sunrise. Do not allow entry to anyone regardless of claims. Avoid looking out sea-facing windows between midnight and 3 a.m. Record red ships in the logbook without speaking their names aloud. In my apartment, I started collecting books on maritime history, particularly focused on the Maine coast. I ordered them online or picked them up from used bookstores. I was looking for something, though I wasn't sure what exactly. I found it about 6 months into my research. A small passage in a book about New England shipwrecks mentioned the Mariner's Folly, lost in January 1892 during a winter storm. The coordinates matched what I'd heard on the radio that night. I found similar accounts for the Queen of Tides, the Blackwater, and the Tempest's Call, all with dates and locations matching exactly what the radio had listed. There was nothing about a ship called Lighthouse Keeper. I kept my research private. I didn't join any historical societies or maritime groups, though Portland had plenty. I just quietly collected information, building a personal archive of shipwrecks, lighthouses, and unexplained maritime incidents along the Maine coast. It was nearly 2 years after I'd left Beacon Point when I saw the article in the Portland Press-Herald. It was small, tucked away on page 6. Longtime Beacon Point lighthouse keeper retires. There was a photo of Grant standing outside the lighthouse, looking exactly as I remembered him. Wool coat, weathered face, distant eyes. The article mentioned he'd been there for nearly 40 years and was retiring to live with his sister in Florida. A new keeper, Michael Reeves, would be taking over. I stared at the article for a long time. I knew I should feel relieved that Grant had made it to retirement, that he'd survived whatever was out there, whatever had taken the other keepers. But all I could think about was this new guy, Michael Reeves. Did he know what he was walking into? I cut out the article and pinned it to my bulletin board. For the next few days, I kept thinking about contacting the Coast Guard station that managed the Lighthouse. I could ask for Reeves's contact information, maybe try to warn him. But what would I say? Watch out for ships that change names. Don't answer when voices call you from outside. I drafted an email but never sent it. I started a letter but tore it up. I even drove to the turnoff one Saturday. My phone loaded with the Coast Guard station's number, but I just sat there in my car, engine idling, staring at the road that would take me back to Beacon Point. In the end, I turned around and drove home. Grant would have told Reeves what he needed to know. He would have written down the rules, just like he did for me. Reeves would either follow them or he wouldn't. That's how it worked out there. The thing is, once you've seen what I saw at Beacon Point, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to believing the world works the way they teach you in engineering classes. Forces aren't just vectors and magnitudes. Some things don't have equations. I still design bridges and buildings according to the laws of physics. I still calculate loads and stresses, material strengths and failure points. I still believe in concrete and steel. But I know there are places where different rules apply. Places where the barrier between what should be and what is grows thin. Places where the only safety comes from following instructions handed down by those who survived before you. I don't know if I'll ever go back to Beacon Point. I don't know if I want to. But sometimes when I'm working late at my drafting table, I'll catch myself listening for 3 quick taps on my window. And sometimes, just for a moment, I think I hear them.